They saw a woman who lived by the book, but they never read her darkest chapter. For years, I kept the silence. For their sake. Now, silence is no longer an option. When her carefully buried past comes knocking, they'll learn I wrote the rules. She was their quiet neighbor. She's about to become their biggest surprise. My name is Anna, and for the last 20 years, the quiet town of Havenwood has known me as its librarian. The hushed reverence of the aisles, the scent of aging paper and binding glue, the rhythmic thump of the date stamp. These are the perimeters of my world. A predictable world, I suppose, to those who see me. A woman of routine, perhaps a little too fond of solitude, content amongst the silent stories that line these shelves. They see the neatly carded books, the gentle smile I offer over the counter, the way my hands, slightly ink-stained, move with a practiced calm. This calm, this meticulous order, it's a sanctuary I've cultivated, a fortress built from due dates and Dewey Decimals. The patrons mostly nod. A few offer a polite, "Good morning, Anna." Young mothers bring their children for story time, their voices a cheerful intrusion I've grown to appreciate. Teenagers slouch in, looking for the latest fantasy series or a quiet corner to escape into their phones. Mr. Henderson, a retired history professor, still comes every Tuesday for his obscure war biographies. They see Anna, the keeper of books, a fixture as reliable as the old grandfather clock in the main hall. And in their seeing, I find a certain peace, a validation of the life I've so carefully constructed. The quiet hum of these shelves, the scent of aged paper, it's a piece I've meticulously built. But even the most well-ordered life can hold untold stories, can it? Does my quiet world make you think of someone in your life, someone whose calm exterior might hide an ocean of experiences? I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. My days unfold with a gentle rhythm. I arrive as the morning sun filters through the tall arched windows, casting dancing dust motes in the golden light. I brew a pot of Earl Grey, the aroma, a familiar comfort. I sort the returned books, my fingers tracing the spines, a silent greeting to old friends. There's a satisfaction in the order, in knowing where everything belongs. It's a stark contrast to a life I once knew, a life I've pushed so far down it feels more like a half-remembered dream, or perhaps a nightmare I've willed into oblivion. Most days it stays buried. Most days, I am just Anna, the librarian. But, lately, the silence has felt different. Thinner. It started subtly, a flicker at the edges of my carefully maintained composure. A news report on the television in the staff room, a headline glimpsed over someone's shoulder. A name, a place, resonating like a plucked string deep within me, a vibration I thought had long since stilled. I'd quickly turn away, focus on cataloging new arrivals, the mundane task a lifeline back to the present. It's nothing, I'd tell myself. Coincidence. The past is a locked room, the key long since discarded. Then came the new patron. He didn't fit Havenwood. Most newcomers here are seeking escape from the city, drawn by the promise of picket fences and quiet nights. This man, however, carried the city with him, in the cut of his dark suit, too sharp for our town, in the restless energy that seemed to emanate from him even as he stood still, browsing the international affairs section. His eyes, when they briefly met mine, were like polished obsidian, unreadable, yet intensely observant. He didn't ask for help, didn't linger at the counter. He just watched. I found myself cataloging his features with an old, unwelcome precision. The way he moved, economical and deliberate. The slight scar above his left eyebrow, almost invisible unless the light caught it just so. These were not the observations of Anna, the librarian. These were echoes from a different self, a self I had sworn to keep dormant, I'd feel a prickle on my skin, the ghost of an instinct I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge in 2 decades. I'd grip the edge of the counter, forcing my breath to even out. The scent of lemon polish a small, grounding anchor. He started coming in more regularly, always to the same section, never checking out a book. He'd just stand there, sometimes for an hour, a silent, unsettling presence. The other patrons didn't seem to notice him particularly, or if they did, they likely dismissed him as another eccentric. But to me, he was a stone dropped into the still pool of my life, the ripples spreading outwards, disturbing the carefully arranged sediment of my past. I tried to ignore him, to lose myself in the familiar routines, but his presence was a constant low thrum of unease. One rainy afternoon, as I was closing up, I found something tucked into a book in the returns bin. It wasn't a bookmark. It was a small, folded piece of paper, the kind used for chess notations. Unfolding it, my breath caught. It wasn't a game. It was a single, stark symbol drawn in black ink, a stylized raven in flight. My blood ran cold. It was a symbol I hadn't seen in over 20 years, a symbol I had prayed I would never see again. It wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a random occurrence. The locked room wasn't locked at all. Someone had found the key. Or perhaps they never needed one. The carefully constructed walls of my sanctuary suddenly felt terrifyingly fragile. The small, innocuous piece of paper felt heavier than lead in my trembling hand. The raven. For a moment, the library, with its comforting scent of old paper and floor wax, dissolved around me. I was transported unwillingly to a place of shadows and whispers, a place I had fought tooth and nail to leave behind. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I could almost hear the echo of coded phrases, feel the cold bite of fear that had once been a constant companion. 20 years. 20 years of meticulous peace, shattered by a simple ink drawing. I quickly shoved the paper into my pocket, my hand instinctively clenching around it, as if trying to crush the omen it represented. My first instinct was to dismiss it. A prank, perhaps? Some local teenager with a penchant for Gothic imagery? But the precision of the drawing, the specific stylization, it was too exact, too chillingly familiar. No, this wasn't random. This was a message. And the man in the dark suit, the silent observer in the international affairs section, his image flashed in my mind. Was he the messenger? Or something more? The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. Havenwood, my sanctuary, suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. The tall windows of the library, once letting in comforting sunlight, now seemed like wide, unblinking eyes. I went through the motions of closing up, my hands unsteady as I locked the heavy oak doors. Each click of a lock, usually a sound of finality and security, now felt like a futile gesture. The walk home, usually a tranquil 15-minute stroll, was fraught with newfound anxiety. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, every rustle of leaves in the crisp autumn air sounded like a footstep behind me. I told myself I was being ridiculous, letting an old ghost spook me. But the raven symbol burned in my pocket. A tangible piece of a past I could no longer deny was reaching for me. Sleep offered no escape that night. My small, cozy bedroom, normally a haven of rest, became a place of restless thoughts. Fragments of memory, long suppressed, flickered at the edges of my consciousness. Dimly lit corridors, the urgent murmur of voices, the metallic tang of adrenaline. I saw faces I hadn't allowed myself to picture in decades, faces that belonged to a life where Anna the librarian didn't exist, couldn't exist. I got up and paced the confines of my living room, the moon casting long, eerie shadows through the window. The life I had built here, the quiet, unassuming existence, felt like a fragile veneer about to be ripped away. The next day at the library, I was a bundle of nerves. Every patron who walked in, every unexpected sound made me jump. I tried to appear normal, to offer the same calm smiles, the same quiet efficiency. But beneath the surface, a storm was raging. And then he arrived. The man in the suit. He went to his usual section, but this time, something was different. He wasn't just browsing. He was waiting. I could feel his gaze on me, even when I wasn't, looking directly at him. It was a patient, predatory stillness. My training, dormant for so long, began to stir, old instincts sharpening. I decided I couldn't just wait for him to make the next move. I needed information. During my lunch break, I used one of the library's public computers, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed that would have surprised anyone who knew me only as Anna. I searched for any information I could on the Raven symbol, using search terms so obscure they would mean nothing to an outsider. The results were sparse, buried deep in archived forums and encrypted sites I hadn't accessed in 2 decades. But there it was, faint whispers, digital breadcrumbs leading back to a world I had renounced. A world of shadows, of clandestine operations, of people who didn't officially exist. The little I found confirmed my deepest fears. The organization I once belonged to, the one I thought had faded into myth, was still active. Or perhaps a new iteration had risen from its ashes, using the old symbols, the old methods. And if they were sending messages, it meant they wanted something. From me. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had believed. I was out, truly out. I had changed my name, my appearance, my entire life. I had become a ghost. But somehow they had found me. As the afternoon wore on, the man in the suit finally approached the counter. He didn't have a book. He simply stood there, his dark eyes meeting mine. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to meet his gaze, to project an air of polite, professional inquiry. He said nothing for a long moment, the silence stretching, thick with unspoken meaning. Then, he placed a small, new-looking chess clock on the counter. He spoke, his voice low, neutral, yet carrying an undeniable weight. He said, "The first game is always the most instructive, wouldn't you agree, Ms. Hayes?" My blood turned to ice. Hayes, my old name, the name I hadn't heard spoken aloud in 20 years. He knew exactly who I was. The carefully constructed world of Anna the librarian was not just cracking, it was about to implode. But the chapter most surprising in my journey was, still to come, a secret kept under lock and key for decades. Keep watching to uncover the full truth behind a silence that lasted for years. The name, Ms. Hayes, hung in the air between us, a forgotten key turning a rusted lock in the deepest recesses of my mind. For a beat, I couldn't breathe. The library, with its quiet hum and the scent of aged paper, seemed to tilt on its axis. My carefully constructed facade, the persona of Anna, the mild-mannered librarian, felt paper-thin, ready to tear at any moment. He watched me, his expression unreadable, those obsidian eyes missing nothing. He wasn't asking a question, he was making a statement. He knew. The past I had buried so deep it had almost become a myth to me was not only real, but had just walked up to my counter. I forced myself to regain some semblance of composure, though my insides were a maelstrom of shock and dawning dread. I didn't acknowledge the name. I couldn't. To do so would be to admit everything, to crumble the fortress I had spent 2 decades building. Instead, I focused on the chess clock. "Is this a donation for the library's game club?" I managed, my voice surprisingly steady, though it felt like it belonged to someone else. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his lips. He knew I was deflecting, but he didn't press. Not yet. "Consider it a reminder," he said, his voice still low, almost a purr. "Some games are never truly over. They just enter a new phase." He pushed the clock a fraction closer to me. "They're expecting you to remember the rules, Ms. Hayes. Or perhaps, Anna, if you prefer. It makes little difference to them now." The casual way he used both names sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just a message, it was a summons. And the "they" he referred to, the shadowy organization I had once served, the one I had betrayed, they were not known for their patience or their forgiveness. He then turned and walked out, as silently and unobtrusively as he had arrived, leaving the chess clock on my counter like a ticking bomb. I stared at it, my mind racing. The polished wood, the twin faces, the silent promise of a countdown. It was a classic intimidation tactic, a symbol of the intellectual and strategic battles I used to wage. They weren't just telling me they'd found me. They were telling me the game was on, whether I wanted to play or not. My carefully ordered life, my peaceful Havenwood existence, was over. The past hadn't just knocked, it had kicked down the door. My quiet evenings with a book and a cup of tea suddenly seemed like a distant, impossible dream. If you're finding Anna's predicament as gripping as I am, show some support and hit that like button. It lets me know you're on this journey with her. That evening, I didn't go straight home. I couldn't. My small, familiar house suddenly felt like a trap. Instead, I drove, aimlessly at first, the chess clock sitting heavy on the passenger seat beside me, a silent, accusing passenger. My mind replayed every detail of my old life, the training, the missions, the faces. The skills I had forced into dormancy began to reawaken. Observation, analysis, threat assessment. I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to in years, the cars behind me, the people on the street, the subtle anomalies in the familiar landscape of Havenwood. It was like a switch had been flipped, a dormant part of my brain coming back online with a vengeance. I eventually found myself at the old abandoned railway bridge on the outskirts of town, a place I sometimes went when I needed to think, to feel the vastness of the sky and the quiet murmur of the river below. The raven symbol, the chess clock, the man in the suit. It all pointed to one undeniable conclusion. They weren't just reminding me of who I was. They wanted me back. Or, more likely, they wanted something I possessed. Information, a skill. Perhaps even retribution for my departure all those years. Ego. The organization, the Magpie Initiative as it was cryptically known, never let go of its assets easily. And I had been one of their most valuable, and then their most significant loss. I knew I had choices, though none of them were appealing. I could run again, try to disappear once more, but they had found me after 20 years of meticulous obscurity. What chance did I have of evading them now, especially if they were more determined? Or I could face them, try to understand what they wanted, and perhaps negotiate. But negotiation with the Magpie Initiative was like negotiating with a shark. You were likely to end up devoured. There was a third option, one that whispered from the darkest corners of my past. The option I had taken 20 years ago, fight back. But that path was fraught with peril, not just for me, but potentially for the innocent lives I had inadvertently touched in Havenwood. As the last light of day bled from the sky, a cold resolve began to settle in my heart. I was no longer just Anna, the librarian. I couldn't afford to be. The skills I had honed, the ruthlessness I had cultivated and then buried, were still there. They had been dormant, not extinguished. If they wanted a game, then a game they would get. But this time, I wouldn't be playing by their rules. I would be setting my own. The quiet librarian was about to reread some very old, very dangerous chapters of her own story, and she would discover that some skills, once learned, are never truly forgotten, especially when survival is on the line. The chess clock sat on my kitchen table, its dual faces a constant, silent accusation. For 2 days, I lived in a state of heightened alert, every creak of the floorboards, every unexpected phone call, sending a jolt of adrenaline through me. I went to the library, performing my duties with an outward calm that was a complete betrayal of the turmoil within. I watched for the man in the suit, but he didn't reappear. It was a classic magpie tactic. Deliver the message, then retreat, letting the psychological pressure build. They knew I understood the implications. They knew the raven and the clock were more than enough to shatter my carefully constructed peace. During those 2 days, I began to prepare, subtly at first. My small house, usually a haven of books and quiet comfort, started to transform. I checked the locks, reinforced the windows in ways that wouldn't be obvious to a casual observer. I reactivated old, encrypted communication channels, my fingers moving with a forgotten fluency over the keyboard, sending out tentative feelers into the digital ether, searching for any whispers about the Magpie Initiative's current activities, any hint of who might be pulling the strings now. It was like trying to navigate a minefield in the dark, but the alternative, waiting passively, was unthinkable. I also started to refamiliarize myself with skills I hadn't used in 2 decades. Late at night, after the lights of Havenwood had blinked out one by one, I moved through my house with a predator's silence, practicing close-quarters defensive maneuvers, my body remembering movements my mind had tried to forget. I assessed escape routes, analyzed potential threats, my mind once again becoming the calculating, strategic instrument it had once been. Anna the librarian was receding, and Hayes, the operative, was slowly, reluctantly, re-emerging from the shadows. It was a strange, unsettling resurrection. Part of me mourned the loss of the simple peace I had fought so hard to achieve, but another colder part recognized the necessity of this transformation. Survival had its own ruthless logic. The information I managed to glean from my old contacts was fragmented and often contradictory, but a picture began to emerge. The Magpie Initiative hadn't just survived, it had evolved, becoming more streamlined, more technologically advanced, and, by all accounts, more ruthless. There were whispers of a new leadership, someone known only by the code name Corvus, Latin for raven. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. It seemed my past was not just catching up, but had been meticulously orchestrated by someone who knew my history, my triggers. This wasn't a random reactivation. It felt personal. On the 3rd day, as I was shelving books in the biography section, a young woman approached me. She was a student type, unassuming, with a backpack slung over one shoulder. She asked for a book on local Havenwood history, a common enough request. As I turned to guide her, she casually said, "Corvus sends his regards. He hopes you're enjoying the game." My blood ran cold. They weren't just watching me, they were infiltrating my daily life, using innocuous proxies to deliver their chilling messages. The library, my sanctuary, now felt utterly compromised. The web was tightening. If these updates are keeping you on the edge of your seat, consider subscribing so you don't miss a single twist in Anna's dangerous game. We're diving deeper with every click. I didn't react outwardly. Years of training kicked in, my expression remaining neutral, helpful. "I'm not sure I understand," I said, my voice calm. The student just smiled, a vacant, almost unnerving expression. "He said you would. He also said the next move is yours. The clock is ticking, Ms. Hayes." Then she simply turned and walked, Away, blending back into the quiet murmur of the library patrons. My carefully maintained composure almost cracked. They were toying with me, enjoying the psychological game, reminding me that they could reach me anywhere, anytime. That evening, I made a decision. I couldn't keep waiting for them to dictate the terms. I needed to take the initiative, to force their hand, or at least gain some leverage. My old training manuals, the ones I had thought I'd never need again, were stored in a false bottom of an old trunk in my attic, along with a few other relics of my former life. Retrieving them felt like exhuming a ghost, the scent of old paper, and something metallic. A faint, lingering odor of gun oil filled the dusty air. These weren't just books. They were a testament to a life of danger and deception. As I pored over the faded pages, the codes, the strategic outlines, the psychological profiles, it all came flooding back. The Magpie Initiative specialized in information warfare, in manipulation, in turning assets. They rarely resorted to overt violence unless it was absolutely necessary, preferring the subtle art of coercion and control. Corvus, whoever he was playing a sophisticated game, and I needed to be more sophisticated. My plan began to form, risky and audacious, but it was the only way I could see to reclaim any semblance of control. I wasn't just going to play their game. I was going to change the board. The quiet streets of Havenwood were about to become the backdrop for a very different kind of story, one far removed from the gentle narratives lining my library shelves. The first step of my plan involved understanding the immediate threat. The man in the suit, the one who had delivered the chess clock, he was the visible link to Corvus. I needed to know more about him, his routines, his contacts, his vulnerabilities. For 2 decades, I had suppressed the skills of surveillance, of tailing a subject without detection. Now, I had to resurrect them, sharpen them against the whetstone of necessity. Anna the librarian faded further into the background as Hayes, the operative, took a more definitive hold. It was a grim transformation, but the alternative was to be a pawn, and I had long ago sworn off that role. I started by subtly observing the library's security camera footage from the days he had visited. His movements were precise, economical, never lingering unnecessarily. He had no discernible tells, no nervous habits. Professional, highly trained. This wasn't some low-level courier. This was an experienced field agent. The challenge would be significant. I couldn't risk a direct confrontation, not yet. I needed to gather intelligence, to understand the chessboard before making a move. My break came unexpectedly. One afternoon, while I was ostensibly reshelving in the oversized art books section, which offered a discreet vantage point of the main entrance, I saw him enter. Not the library, but the small independent bookstore across the street. It was a curious choice. Havenwood Books was a quaint, slightly dusty establishment run by old Mr. Abernathy, a man whose most exciting recent event was a leaky roof. What interest could a Magpie operative have there? I watched him through the large front window of the library, my pulse quickening. He didn't browse. He went straight to the counter, spoke briefly with Mr. Abernathy, and then Abernathy gestured towards a back room, a place usually reserved for storage. This was an anomaly, a deviation from the expected. The Magpies were masters of clandestine meetings in anonymous, easily controlled locations. A small-town bookstore, with its unpredictable civilian traffic, didn't fit their profile. Unless, of course, the bookstore itself, or someone within. It was part of their network. The thought was unsettling. Had their tendrils reached even into the seemingly innocuous fabric of Havenwood? It was a chilling possibility, the idea that my quiet town might be harboring more secrets than just my own was a disturbing revelation. That evening, After the library closed, I didn't go home. I circled back to Havenwood Books. The lights were off, the closed sign hanging crookedly in the window. Using a set of tools I hadn't touched in years, tools I'd kept hidden with the same diligence as my past, I let myself in through the back service door. The lock was laughably simple. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating stacks of unsold novels and forgotten local histories. I moved with a silence born of long practice, every sense alert. The back room Mr. Abernathy had gestured to was indeed a storage area, but tucked away in a corner, behind a precariously balanced tower of encyclopedias, was a newer, heavy-duty, metal filing cabinet, starkly out of place amidst the charming clutter. It was locked, of course, but with a high-security mechanism that spoke volumes. This wasn't for storing unsold inventory. This was for something else entirely. It took me the better part of an hour, my fingers working with a delicate precision I'd almost forgotten I possessed. But finally, I heard the satisfying click of the tumblers. Inside, there were no dusty manuscripts. There were encrypted hard drives, burner phones, and a ledger detailing untraceable financial transactions, all meticulously organized, and one small, leather-bound notebook. This notebook was different. It wasn't a ledger. It contained handwritten notes, observations, almost like a field journal. As I flipped through its pages, my blood ran colder. It detailed surveillance reports on several Havenwood residents, myself included. My routines, my habits, even small, insignificant details about my life as Anna were all meticulously documented. But it was the notes on Mr. Henderson, the retired history professor who frequented my library, that made my breath catch. Henderson, it seemed, wasn't just a kindly old man with a passion for war biographies. According to these notes, he was a former intelligence analyst from a rival agency, long thought to be retired and harmless. The magpies were not just watching me. They were mapping out the entire town, assessing potential assets, threats, and leverage points. Havenwood was not a sanctuary. It was a carefully observed fishbowl. The man in the suit wasn't just a messenger. He was a local handler. And Mr. Abernathy, the seemingly harmless bookstore owner, was clearly a sleeper agent, a node in their network. The reach of Corvus was far greater, far more insidious than I had initially imagined. My small town was a chessboard, and the pieces were more numerous and complex than I could have ever guessed. If you're as invested in Anna's discoveries as she is, why not share this story with a friend who loves a good thriller? Let's see if they can predict Corvus's next move. The revelations in that small, leather-bound notebook shifted everything. My understanding of the threat had been too narrow, too focused on my own past. Corvus wasn't just interested in me. They were interested in Havenwood, or rather, what Havenwood contained. The surveillance notes on Mr. Henderson were particularly alarming. If they knew about his past, they could try to leverage him, recruit him, or neutralize him. And I, Anna the librarian, had unwittingly been a point of regular, innocent contact with him. Had I inadvertently put him in more danger? The thought was a cold weight in my chest. I photographed every page of the notebook and the most critical parts of the ledger with a small, specialized camera I still possessed, then carefully replaced everything, locking the cabinet and exiting the bookstore as silently as I had entered. The streets of Havenwood felt different now, imbued with a sinister undercurrent. Every familiar face I might pass on my way home was now a potential unknown. Were they, too, under surveillance? Were they part of this intricate web Corvus was weaving? The paranoia was a bitter taste in my mouth, but it was a necessary byproduct of the truth. Back in the relative safety of my own home, I analyzed the information. The financial transactions in the ledger pointed to a sophisticated money laundering operation. likely funding the Magpie Initiative's activities in the region. The burner phones and encrypted drives suggested a local communications hub. Havenwood wasn't just a listening post. It was an active operational base. And the man in the suit, whose name the notebook revealed as Silas, was evidently the local coordinator, with Mr. Abernathy as his unsuspecting-looking quartermaster and communications relay. The most pressing concern, however, was Mr. Henderson. I had to warn him, but how? A direct approach was too risky. If Silas or Abernathy saw me meeting with him outside our usual library interactions, it would raise immediate red flags. They already knew I was Ms. Hayes. Any deviation from my established Anna routine would be scrutinized. I needed a way to communicate that was deniable, untraceable, using the very environment they were surveilling. The library. The next morning, my nerves were frayed, but my resolve was firm. When Mr. Henderson came in for his weekly visit, I greeted him with my usual quiet smile. As he browsed the history section, I busied myself nearby, reshelving books. When I was certain Silas wasn't present, I had developed a sixth sense for his unnerving presence, and no other patrons were too close. I subtly misshelved a specific slim volume of poetry next to the war biographies he was examining. Tucked inside its pages was a small folded note, written in a simple substitution cipher I was fairly certain a former intelligence analyst would recognize, or at least be intrigued enough by to decipher. The note was brief. Raven watches the historian. Old Bridge. Midnight. Come alone if you value your peace. It was a gamble. He might ignore it, dismiss it as a prank, or worse, he might be compromised and report it. But the notes in Silas's journal suggested Henderson was unaware of their scrutiny, categorized as a dormant asset, not an active threat or collaborator. I had to trust my assessment of his character, the quiet intelligence I'd always sensed behind his gentle demeanor. All day, I felt the weight of that gamble. Every time the library door opened, I expected Silas, or worse, someone I didn't recognize, someone sent by Corvus. The hours crawled by, each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall amplifying my anxiety. That night, as midnight approached, I made my way to the old railway bridge. The air was cold, the moon obscured by clouds, leaving the landscape in deep shadow. I wasn't dressed as Anna. I wore dark, practical clothing, my hair pulled back, my movements silent and purposeful. Hayes was fully present now. I positioned myself in the skeletal remains of the old signalman's hut, offering cover and a good vantage point of the bridge approach. I waited. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant murmur of the river. Doubts gnawed at me. Had I been reckless? Had I misread the situation? Misjudged Henderson? Then a lone figure emerged from the darkness, walking slowly but deliberately onto the bridge. It was Henderson. He was alone. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. He stopped in the middle of the bridge, looking around, a silhouette against the faint glow of the town lights in the distance. I stepped out of the shadows. "Mr. Henderson," I called softly. He turned, startled, but didn't cry out. He peered into the darkness where I stood. "Ms. Hayes, I presume?" he said, his voice surprisingly calm, though tinged with an undeniable curiosity and a hint of steel I hadn't heard in the library. It seemed the quiet historian had a few secrets of his own. The game was indeed becoming more complex, and the players more interesting. If Anna's courage and quick thinking impress you, let us know by hitting the notification bell so you're the first to see what happens when these two former operatives finally talk. You can call me Anna, Mr. Henderson. It's the name I prefer these days, I replied, stepping further into the dim light filtering from the distant town. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze sharp and analytical, the kindly old historian persona momentarily stripped away, revealing the keen observer beneath. A rather cryptic invitation, Anna. The Raven, the old bridge. It certainly piqued my interest. I confess, your usual recommendations in the library, while excellent, are rarely this dramatic. A faint smile played on his lips, but his eyes remained serious. I apologize for the theatrics, I said, but I had reason to believe we were both under surveillance and that a direct conversation would be unwise. I paused, then decided directness was best. They know who you are, Mr. Henderson. Or rather, who you were. The Magpie Initiative. They have a file on you. His smile vanished. The name clearly resonated, a shadow passing over his features. Magpies, he murmured almost to himself. I thought they'd faded into obscurity long ago. It seems I was mistaken. They're back. Or perhaps they never truly left, I continued. And they're operating here, in Havenwood. They have a local coordinator, a man named Silas, and a communications hub at Abernathy's bookstore. I saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes at the mention of Abernathy. It seemed even he, with his past experience, hadn't suspected the harmless bookseller. Abernathy? He questioned, a note of disbelief in his voice. I nodded. His shop is a front. I found surveillance notes, financial ledgers. They're watching several people in town, including you. They've classified you as a dormant asset. Henderson absorbed this information in silence, his gaze fixed on the dark, swirling water below the bridge. The calm with which he received the news was unnerving in itself. It spoke of a man long accustomed to dangerous truths. And you, Anna? He finally asked, turning back to me. How do you fit into this? Your knowledge of their operations, their symbols. It's not something a librarian from Havenwood would typically possess. It wasn't an accusation, merely a statement of fact, an invitation for me to reveal my own hand. I was once part of them, I admitted, the words feeling heavy, tasting like ash in my mouth. A long time ago. I left. I changed my identity. I built a life here, a quiet life. I thought I was free of them. But they found me. They sent Silas. They want something from me. I didn't elaborate further. He didn't need the details of my past betrayals or my reasons for leaving. What mattered was the present danger, a danger that now clearly encompassed him as well. So, the Raven watches the historian because the Raven also watches one of its own lost chicks, Henderson mused, a wry, almost melancholic tone in his voice. And what is it they want from you, do you think? I shrugged. I don't know for sure. Information, perhaps. Or to reactivate me. Or maybe it's just Corvus, their new leader, playing a game. The man Silas works for. Henderson's eyes narrowed at the name Corvus. It was clear the pieces were falling into place for him, painting a grim picture. This Corvus, Henderson said slowly. He's making a bold move, operating so openly, even if it's under a veneer of small-town quiet. The magpies of old were more subtle. He paused, then looked directly at me. What do you intend to do, Anna? It was the crucial question. The reason I had risked contacting him. I don't intend to be their pawn, I stated firmly, and I don't intend for them to harm innocent people in this town, or leverage individuals like yourself. I need to know what their objective is here in Havenwood. It's bigger than just me. The surveillance, the money laundering, it points to a significant operation. A long silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the sighing of the wind through the girders of the old bridge. Henderson was weighing his options, assessing me, assessing the situation. Finally, he spoke. It seems my quiet retirement is officially over. He met my gaze, and for the first time, I saw a spark of the old fire, the analyst, the operative he once was, All right, Anna. You have my attention, and perhaps my assistance. But we need to be exceptionally careful. If Silas and his network are as embedded as you say, any misstep could be problematic. He then added with a grim smile, "It appears storytime is about to get a lot more interesting." The alliance was fragile, unspoken, but it was there. Two former operatives, from different sides of a forgotten war, now united by a common threat in a small, unsuspecting town. The odds were stacked against us, but for the first time since Silas walked into my library, I didn't feel completely alone. The narrative of my quiet life had just gained an unexpected co-author, and the next chapter promised to be anything but predictable. Sharing this story can be as simple as hitting the share button. Let your friends in on Anna's secret and see who can guess what these two unlikely allies will do next. Our alliance, forged in the dead of night on that old creaking bridge, was one of necessity. Henderson, or Harry, as he insisted I call him in our clandestine meetings, brought a wealth of analytical skills and a network of dormant, almost forgotten contacts from his old agency days. I brought field experience, a more intimate knowledge of magpie tactics, and a desperate driving need to protect the life I had built, however illusory it now seemed. Our first task was to understand Corvus's endgame in Havenwood. Reactivating. Me surveilling Harry, these felt like pieces of a larger puzzle. We began to pool our knowledge. Harry, with his historian's patience, started cross-referencing the names and entities from Silas's ledger with old intelligence databases he could still discreetly access. I focused on Silas and Abernathy, conducting careful, intermittent surveillance, mapping their routines, looking for patterns, for weaknesses. It was a delicate dance, operating in the shadows of a town where everyone knew everyone, where any unusual behavior could be noted and, potentially, reported back to our adversaries. Every hushed conversation in a secluded corner of the library, every shared glance over a borrowed book was fraught with risk. Harry's research soon yielded a disturbing connection. Several of the shell corporations listed in Silas's ledger were linked, through a complex web of intermediaries, to a cutting-edge tech company specializing in next-generation data encryption and secure communications, a company called Aegis Dynamics. Aegis was known for its impenetrable systems, sought after by governments and major corporations worldwide, and its reclusive, brilliant CEO, a man named Alistair Finch, who had, years ago, been a prodigious young consultant for various intelligence agencies before vanishing from public life, only to re-emerge as the head of Aegis. Finch, Harry mused during one of our late-night sessions in the library's archives, the scent of old leather and dust a strangely comforting backdrop to our dangerous work. He was a ghost, even back then, rumored to be paranoid, obsessed with security. If Corvus has ties to Aegis, or to Finch himself, it would explain their interest in advanced communications and encryption. The Magpies are upgrading, significantly. This raised a chilling question. What were they planning to do with such advanced, secure communication technology? And why base any part of that operation in a sleepy town like Havenwood? My surveillance of Silas yielded a crucial piece of the puzzle. I observed him making several discreet trips to a remote, heavily wooded area just outside town, a place known locally as Blackwood Ridge. It was private property, fenced off, with no trespassing. Signs that looked newer, more official than typical rural warnings. Using a long-range lens, I managed to get glimpses of a newly constructed, unassuming outbuilding deep within the trees, far from any public road. It wasn't on any local maps. It was clearly meant to be hidden. Combining this with Harry's information about Aegis Dynamics, a hypothesis began to form. What if Havenwood, with its unassuming facade and relative isolation, was being set up as a secure, off-grid data haven or a clandestine communications relay point for the Magpie Initiative, utilizing Aegis technology. Such a facility would need to be undetectable, its data streams untraceable. It would be an invaluable asset for an organization operating in the shadows. And my specific skills in network intrusion and data security, skills I had used for the Magpies before I turned against them, would be highly valuable in setting up or testing such a system. Perhaps that was why Corvus wanted me. The thought sent a cold dread through me. If they were building something that sophisticated, something that vital, they would protect it fiercely. And anyone who threatened it, or anyone who refused to cooperate, would be dealt with ruthlessly. Harry and I knew we were treading on extremely dangerous ground. We were no longer just dealing with local operatives. We were brushing against a global network with significant resources and lethal capabilities. Our quiet little town was, it seemed, a critical node in a much larger, much darker web. If they're building a secure comms hub or data vault out at Blackwood Ridge, Harry said, his voice low and grave, they'll have state-of-the-art security, both physical and digital. Getting close will be nearly impossible, and trying to dismantle it from the outside, without knowing its exact purpose or capabilities, is a fool's errand. He was right. We needed more information, concrete proof of what was happening at Blackwood Ridge, but how to get it without walking directly into Corvus's trap. The answer, I realized, might lie with Silas himself. He was the local linchpin. If we could somehow compromise him, access his communications, or turn him, he could be our way in. It was an incredibly risky proposition. Silas was no fool. He was a seasoned operative. But he was also human, and every human had a weakness, a pressure point. Finding his, without getting ourselves killed in the process, became our new, urgent priority. The stakes were rising with every passing day, and the quiet life of Anna the librarian felt like a fading photograph from a distant, irretrievable past. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, but one thing was clear: inaction was not an option. We had to keep moving, keep pushing, before Corvus's plans for Havenwood, and for us, came to fruition. The deeper Anna and Harry dig, the more dangerous their quest becomes. If you believe they have what it takes to uncover the truth, give this video a thumbs up to show your support for their courage. Targeting Silas was like deciding to poke a hibernating bear. He was dangerous, alert, and deeply enmeshed in the key Magpie network. But he was also our most direct link to the Blackwood Ridge facility and, by extension, to Corvus's plans. Harry and I spent days meticulously reviewing everything I had gathered on him, his routines, his brief interactions, the sparse details from the recovered notebook. We needed an angle, a way to approach him that wouldn't immediately trigger his well-honed defenses. Direct confrontation was out. Subtlety and manipulation were the Magpie's own preferred tools, and we would have to turn those tools against them. Harry, with his analyst's mind, focused on Silas's psychological profile, as much as we could deduce. He's confident, bordering on arrogant, Harry observed, poring over my notes. He enjoys the game, the feeling of control. That was evident in how he approached you, Anna. He savored delivering those cryptic messages. People like that often have a blind spot, their own perceived invincibility. This gave me an idea, a dangerous one, but potentially effective. If Silas enjoyed control, perhaps we could make him believe he was still in control, even as we guided him. My plan involved using Abernathy's bookstore, the established Magpie communications hub. If we could intercept or manipulate a message intended for Silas, or plant one ourselves, we might be able to lure him into a compromised position, or feed him information that would lead him to make a mistake. The risk was enormous. Abernathy was a sleeper, but he was still part of their network. The store was likely monitored, perhaps not constantly, but certainly with enough diligence to detect a clumsy intrusion. I decided to leverage my Anna the Librarian persona. Abernathy knew me as a fellow lover of books, a quiet neighbor. I started frequenting his store more often, always under a plausible pretext, looking for an out-of-print local history book, inquiring about special orders. During these visits, I subtly mapped the store's layout again, noting camera blind spots, the patterns of Abernathy's movements, the times he was alone. I needed to access his back room again, specifically the communications equipment Silas likely used or received messages through. The opportunity came during Havenwood's annual Founders' Day street fair. The town would be bustling, Abernathy's store likely busier than usual, or perhaps he'd even close for a few hours to enjoy the festivities. Under the cover of the town-wide distraction, I planned to slip into the bookstore. Harry, meanwhile, would create a diversion, something to draw Abernathy away from the shop if he was there, or to keep any of Silas's potential lookouts occupied. Harry, ever the historian, proposed setting up a small, impromptu local history quiz near the town square, complete with minor prizes. Just the sort of quirky, harmless event that would fit Havenwood and potentially draw a crowd, including, hopefully, a curious Abernathy. On the day of the fair, Havenwood was a cacophony of cheerful noise and activity. Stalls lined Main Street, music played and children darted through the crowds. As planned, Harry, looking every bit the amiable retired professor, had set up his history quiz. I watched from a distance as Abernathy, after a period of visible curiosity, locked up his shop and wandered over to Harry's booth. This was my chance. With my heart pounding, I slipped down the alleyway behind the bookstore. The back door, as before, yielded to my tools with relative ease. Inside, the store was quiet, the festive sounds from outside muffled. I moved quickly to the back room, my senses on high alert. The filing cabinet was still there, but my target, this time, was a small, nondescript router and a satellite modem tucked away on a dusty shelf, the heart of their local communications. I had prepared a small, custom-built device, something I'd pieced together from components ordered online under various aliases. It was designed to attach to their system, passively intercepting data traffic, and, if needed, injecting carefully crafted messages. Installing it was nerve-wracking. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant shout from the fair sounded like discovery. Just as I was finishing, I heard the jingle of the front doorbell. My blood ran cold. Abernathy. He must have returned sooner than expected. I had seconds. I quickly concealed my work, my mind racing. There was no time to get back out the way I came. My only option was a narrow, cluttered storage closet at the far end of the back room. I slipped inside, pulling the door almost shut, leaving only a hair's breadth crack to see through, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was an unscheduled complication, and a potentially fatal one. The hunter had, for a moment, become the hunted. The silence of the back room was broken only by my own ragged breathing and the approaching footsteps of Abernathy. The careful dance of espionage had just missed a critical step, and I was dangerously off balance. If you're holding your breath wondering if Anna will escape, you're not alone. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think her next move should be. Pressed into the cramped, dusty confines of the storage closet, I held my breath, every nerve screaming. The smell of mildew and old cardboard was suffocating. Through the tiny crack in the door, I saw Abernathy enter the back room. He moved with a familiar, slightly stooped gait, but his eyes, usually mild and a little unfocused, were sharp, scanning the room with a practiced diligence that belied his harmless shopkeeper persona. He hadn't seen me, not yet, but his presence. There was a terrifying complication. My carefully laid plan was unraveling. He didn't immediately go to the communications equipment. Instead, he went to the filing cabinet, the one I had previously opened. He unlocked it, his movements economical, and retrieved a small, slim laptop. He sat at a makeshift desk, powered it on, and began typing. I could hear the faint click of the keys, each sound an eternity. Was he checking in? Reporting something? My mind raced through the possibilities. Had Harry's diversion failed? Or worse, had it somehow tipped them off? Minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity. I could feel a cramp starting in my leg, but I dared not move, dared not even shift my weight. Then I heard another sound, the distinct, sharp chime of a specific messaging app, one I recognized from my brief glimpse of the burner phones. Silas had. Abernathy leaned closer to his laptop. His expression tensed. I couldn't see the screen, but I could infer from his reaction that the message was unexpected, perhaps urgent. He typed a quick reply, then another message came through. This time he let out a frustrated sigh. Suddenly he stood up, muttered something under his breath about amateurs and Corvus's new protocols, and walked briskly out of the back room, leaving the laptop open on the desk. I heard him moving around in the main shop area, the jingle of the front doorbell again, and then the distinct sound of the front door locking. Silence. Had he left? It was too risky to assume. I waited, counting to 500, then to 1,000. The silence held. Cautiously, slowly, I pushed the closet door open a fraction more. The back room was empty. The laptop screen glowed invitingly. This was an unlooked-for opportunity, a potentially massive intelligence coup, but also an incredible risk. If he returned while I was accessing it, I would be trapped, exposed. But the lure of what might be on that laptop, especially one connected to their secure network, was too strong to ignore. Every instinct I had honed over years of clandestine operations screamed at me to take the chance. I slipped out of the closet, my limbs stiff, and moved to the desk. My fingers flew over the trackpad. The messaging app was still open. It was a secure, encrypted platform, but because Abernathy hadn't logged out, I had direct access to his recent conversations. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the message. History. Most of it was coded, operational jargon. But one recent exchange stood out, a conversation with a contact labeled only S. Silas. The messages confirmed my earlier suspicions. Silas was indeed expecting a data packet, a software update, for the Ridge facility, as he called it, to be delivered through Abernathy's relay. But more importantly, there was a message from Silas expressing frustration. The courier with the primary encryption key is delayed. Finch is getting antsy. Corvus wants the system fully operational by week's end. Tell me you have the local backup key secure. Abernathy's reply. Backup key is in the usual safe haven. Will await courier or further instructions. An encryption key. A backup encryption key for the Blackwood Ridge facility. Likely stored somewhere Abernathy considered exceptionally safe. This was it. This was the leverage I needed. More direct, and potentially more valuable than just passively monitoring their communications. If I could find that key, I could potentially access their systems at the Ridge, understand their true capabilities, and perhaps even disrupt their operations. It was a long shot, but it was the first tangible vulnerability I had found in their local setup. I quickly photographed the screen with my specialized camera, focusing on the critical messages. I didn't dare try to download anything or probe. Further, time was my enemy. Then, I wiped my prints from the laptop and the desk, slipped back out the way I came, my mind reeling with the new information. Abernathy had unknowingly handed me a critical piece of the puzzle. The usual safe haven. Where would a man like Abernathy, a seemingly ordinary shopkeeper who was secretly a Magpie operative, hide something so valuable? The answer I suspected would not be obvious. It would be hidden in plain sight, under the very nose of the unsuspecting town. The hunt for the key was on, and the stakes had just been raised exponentially. The tension is almost unbearable. If you're on the edge of your seat waiting to see if Anna can find this crucial key, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. You won't want to miss what happens next as she dives deeper into Corvus's dangerous world. The phrase, usual safe haven, echoed in my mind. Abernathy was a creature of habit. His life in Havenwood a carefully constructed facade of normalcy. His safe haven wouldn't be a high-tech vault or a secret compartment in his shop. That was too predictable for a magpie, too easily discovered if their cover was blown. No, it would be something deeply integrated into his established routine, something that wouldn't arouse suspicion, something that was, in its own way, a part of Havenwood's fabric. I needed to think like Abernathy, the unassuming bookseller, not Abernathy, the magpie operative. I shared my discovery with Harry. His eyes lit up with a grim excitement. An encryption key, he breathed. If we can get that, Anna, it could unlock everything. But usual safe haven, that's deliberately vague. It could be anywhere. We brainstormed, listing all of Abernathy's known habits, his routines, the places he frequented outside the bookstore. He was a member of the Havenwood Historical Society, a regular at the weekly chess club held in the library's community room, a detail that now seemed deeply ironic. And he was known for his meticulous prize-winning roses he cultivated in his small garden, the roses. Something about that detail snagged in my mind. Gardening was a patient, meticulous hobby, much like the tradecraft of a sleeper agent. Abernathy's roses were famous in town. He even supplied blooms for local events. Could his safe haven be connected to his passion? It seemed almost too quaint, too domestic for something as critical as an encryption key. But that was exactly the kind of misdirection the magpies excelled at, hiding something vital in the mundane. Then, with my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs, I made the call using Abernathy's burner. A synthesized voice answered, demanding authentication codes. I supplied them from the ledger. There was a pause. Then the voice said, "State your purpose." I delivered my carefully rehearsed message, claiming to have discovered a critical flaw that threatened the Nightfall launch, a flaw only someone with my unique historical knowledge of their legacy systems could address. I offered to demonstrate in person at Blackwood Ridge. Another long, agonizing silence. Then the synthesized voice returned. "Your presence is requested. A transport will be arranged. You will come alone. Any deviation will have severe consequences." The line went dead. I looked at Harry, my expression grim but resolute. They had taken the bait. The invitation was extended. Now I had to prepare to walk into the heart of the storm, armed with nothing but my wits, my old skills, and a desperate hope that I could somehow avert a catastrophe that threatened to plunge the world into chaos. The quiet life of Anna the librarian was a distant memory. Hayes, the operative, was about to face her most dangerous mission yet. Anna is walking into the viper's nest. Will her gamble pay off, or is she sealing her fate? If you're as invested in Anna's dangerous mission as we are, hit that like button and share this video with fellow thriller enthusiasts. Let's see who can predict the outcome. The hours leading up to my invitation to Blackwood Ridge were a blur of tense preparation. Harry and I worked with a quiet, focused intensity. He would be my lifeline, my only connection to the outside world once I was inside Corvus's fortress. We set up a covert communication system, a tiny subdermal implant I'd retrieved from my old cache of gear, which would allow for short, encrypted burst transmissions to a receiver Harry would monitor. It was risky, easily detectable if they were thorough in their searches, but it was better than nothing. I also prepared a small, innocuous-looking USB drive. Outwardly, it contained the fabricated vulnerability data I had promised Corvus. But hidden within its partitions was a suite of custom-written malware, worms, logic bombs, and data wipers, designed to target the specific Magpie systems outlined in the Blackwood Ridge schematics. If I could get physical access to their core network, even for a few minutes, I might be able to deploy it. Crippling Nightfall protocol from within. It was a long shot, a digital David against a Goliath of cyber warfare, but it was the only offensive weapon I had. As the designated time approached, a black, unmarked van with tinted windows pulled up outside my small cottage. Two figures emerged, clad in dark, tactical gear, their faces obscured by masks. They were silent, professional, their movements economical. There were no questions, no pleasantries. One gestured for me to enter the van. This was it. No turning back. I gave Harry a final, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of the immense risks we were both taking. He looked worried, his face etched with concern, but he simply nodded back, a grim determination in his eyes. The journey to Blackwood. Ridge was short, but it felt like an eternity. I was blindfolded almost immediately, my hands secured with zip ties. I focused on my breathing, on staying calm, on running through the schematics of the facility in my mind, memorizing potential access points, vulnerabilities, escape routes, however unlikely the latter might be. When the van finally stopped, I was escorted out, still blindfolded, into what felt like an underground entrance. The air was cool, sterile, with the faint hum of powerful machinery. My blindfold was removed. I was in a stark, white corridor, brightly lit, the kind of anonymous, soulless architecture favored by clandestine organizations. My escorts led me through a series of security checkpoints, retinal scanners, voice print analyzers, full body, X-rays. They were thorough. I could only hope my subdermal implant was shielded enough, my custom USB drive innocuous enough to pass their scrutiny. The tension was almost unbearable. Each scan, each verification, felt like a gamble with my life. Finally, I was brought into a minimalist, high-tech control room. Banks of monitors displayed complex data streams, network topologies, and what looked like global communication matrices. In the center of the room, standing before a massive, wall-sized screen that showed a countdown timer for Nightfall protocol, now less than 72 hours away, was a figure I presumed to be Corvus. He was younger than I expected, perhaps late 30s, with an intense, almost ascetic look, his eyes burning with a fanatical gleam. He regarded me with a cool, appraising stare. Silas stood beside him, a smirk playing on his lips. It seemed my local handler had been promoted, or at least was in high favor. "Ms. Hayes," Corvus said, his voice surprisingly soft, yet carrying an unmistakable air of command. "Or should I say, Anna, you've caused us considerable inconvenience." His gaze flickered to Silas. "It seems our local arrangements were not as secure as we believed." Silas's smirk wavered slightly. "You claim to have found a flaw in Nightfall," Corvus continued, turning back to me. "A flaw that threatens its success. A bold claim, especially from someone who has actively worked against our interests." "The flaw is real," I stated, keeping my voice steady, meeting his intense gaze. "It relates to legacy code in the data integration. Protocols, something your current team, for all their brilliance, might have overlooked. It could cause cascading failures at the point of deployment." I held out the USB drive. "The details are here, but I'll need direct access to your core systems to demonstrate and implement the fix." Corvus considered me for a long moment, his eyes unblinking. The silence in the control room was absolute, save for the quiet hum of the servers. I could feel Silas's eyes boring into me, full of suspicion. This was the critical juncture. If Corvus didn't believe me, if he sensed the deception, my mission was over before it even began. "Very well," Corvus said finally. "You will be given supervised access. Silas will accompany you. But be warned, Ms. Hayes, we are not fools. Any attempt at subterfuge, any deviation from your stated purpose, and your assistance will no longer be required, permanently." A cold knot formed in my stomach, but I nodded, projecting an air of reluctant cooperation. Silas gestured towards a workstation. "Let's see this critical flaw of yours," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. As I sat down, ostensibly to demonstrate the vulnerability, I knew this was my only chance. I had to find a way to deploy my malware to cripple Nightfall, all while under the watchful, hostile eyes of Silas and Corvus. The countdown timer on the wall was a stark reminder of the rapidly dwindling time, the fate of countless innocent lives. The stability of global systems rested on what I did in the next few hours. The pressure was immense, the risks astronomical, but failure was not an option. The final showdown is approaching. Anna is inside the belly of the beast. Can she outsmart Corvus and stop Nightfall Protocol before it's too late? This is the moment we've all been waiting for. Don't forget to hit that notification bell, because the explosive finale is coming up next, and you won't want to miss a second of it. Sitting at that terminal, with Silas hovering over my shoulder like a vulture and Corvus watching from across the control room, was the most intense pressure I had ever experienced. Every keystroke, every command I typed, was scrutinized. I began by loading the vulnerability data from my prepared USB drive, explaining the fabricated flaw in a calm, technical manner, using jargon and concepts I knew would resonate with their understanding of complex systems. I had to make it believable, to draw their attention to the decoy while I subtly probed for an opening to their core network. Silas was relentless, questioning every step, his suspicion a palpable force. But my feigned flaw was well crafted, designed to appear as a genuine, if obscure, oversight. I could see a flicker of concern in Corvus's eyes as I demonstrated how this supposed vulnerability could, theoretically, compromise the integrity of Nightfall's deployment. He was intelligent, and he understood the potential, however manufactured, for catastrophic failure. This bought me precious minutes I used to run subtle diagnostic scripts, mapping the internal network architecture, searching for an unguarded port, a misconfigured server, any tiny crack in their digital fortress. Then, I found it. A legacy diagnostic subroutine, overlooked in their system upgrades, still active and possessing surprisingly elevated privileges. It was a long shot, but it was an opening. To implement the patch and verify its integrity, I announced, keeping my voice level. I need to interface directly with the primary data controller for the Nightfall sequence. It's the only way to ensure the fix propagates correctly across all deployment nodes. Under the pretext of researching heirloom roses for the library's gardening section, I paid a visit to Abernathy's home. It was a small, well-kept cottage on the edge of town, surrounded by a beautifully manicured garden. His roses were indeed spectacular. Abernathy, seemingly pleased by my interest, gave me a tour, pointing out his prize-winning midnight blue and crimson glory varieties. As he spoke, I subtly scanned the garden, the shed, the greenhouse, any unusual features. Nothing seemed out of place, nothing overtly suspicious. Then I noticed it. Near an old gnarled apple tree at the back of the garden, there was a small, weathered stone bench. It looked ancient, a permanent fixture. But beneath one of its stone supports, almost hidden by overgrown ivy, I saw a faint, almost imperceptible scrape mark on the stone, as if it had been moved recently or regularly. It was tiny, something only a trained eye looking for anomalies would spot. My heart quickened. Could it be that simple? That audacious? I couldn't investigate further with Abernathy present. I thanked him for the tour, feigned immense gratitude for his gardening wisdom, and left. That night, armed with my tools and cloaked in darkness, I returned. Bypassing his rudimentary home security was straightforward. The garden was silent, bathed in pale moonlight. I went straight to the stone bench. The support I had noticed was indeed loose. With a considerable effort, I managed to shift the heavy stone. Beneath it, embedded in the soil, was a small, weatherproof military-grade pelican case. My fingers fumbled with the latches, my breath catching in my throat. Inside, nestled on a bed of foam, was not just a USB drive, the backup encryption, key, presumably, but also a slim burner phone, different from the ones I'd seen in his shop, and a small coded ledger. This was more than I had hoped for. This wasn't just a key. It was Abernathy's personal emergency kit, his own private stash. He was more deeply embedded, more independent within the local Magpie network than I had initially assumed. He wasn't just a relay. He was a trusted custodian. I quickly photographed the contents of the ledger. It seemed to detail private communications with someone other than Silas, someone higher up, possibly even a direct link to Corvus or his inner circle. I then used a device I'd brought to quickly clone the USB drive. I didn't dare take the original. Abernathy would know it was missing. But a perfect copy? That was deniable. That was leverage. After replacing everything meticulously, ensuring the bench and the ground beneath looked undisturbed, I slipped away, the cloned drive clutched in my hand like a talisman. Back in my house, with Harry looking on anxiously, I inserted the cloned drive into my secured laptop. The encryption was formidable, military grade, as expected. But I had faced Magpie encryption before. I had, in fact, helped design some of their earlier iterations. My fingers flew across the keyboard, running decryption algorithms, trying old backdoors I myself had built and then supposedly sealed. Hours passed. The first rays of dawn were painting the sky when, finally, a single word flashed on the screen. Accessed. A wave of triumph, mixed with a profound sense of dread, washed over me. We were in. The drive contained not just a backup key for the Blackwood Ridge facility, but also schematics, communication protocols, and, most chillingly, a project timeline. They weren't just building a data haven. They were preparing for a specific event, codenamed Nightfall Protocol, scheduled to go live in less than a week. The details were sparse, heavily encrypted, but it was clear that Nightfall Protocol involved a massive coordinated cyber attack aimed at crippling critical infrastructure. Havenwood wasn't just a relay, it was a launch pad. And the clock was ticking, louder and more menacingly than ever before. The secrets Anna is uncovering are getting darker and the stakes higher. If you're as hooked on this thrilling story of espionage and courage as we are, make sure to share it with your friends and challenge them to guess what Nightfall Protocol could be before Anna does. Nightfall Protocol. The name itself was ominous, conjuring images of darkness and chaos. The fragmented schematics and protocols on the clone drive, even heavily encrypted, painted a terrifying picture. It wasn't just about secure communications for the Magpie initiative, it was about offensive capabilities. Harry and I worked feverishly, cross-referencing the data with known cyber warfare tactics and Aegis Dynamics specialized technology. The picture that emerged was one of a sophisticated, multi-pronged attack designed to disrupt financial networks, compromise government communications, and potentially even interfere with power grids. It was audacious, catastrophic, and Havenwood's Blackwood Ridge facility was clearly a crucial command and control center for it. The timeline was the most alarming part. Less than a week. We had days, not weeks, to understand the full scope of Nightfall Protocol and find a way to stop it. The Magpies weren't just reactivating me for my old skills. They were likely planning to use the Ridge facility to launch this attack, and my expertise would be invaluable in ensuring its success, or perhaps in troubleshooting any last-minute glitches. My refusal to cooperate, my attempts to uncover their plans had made me a liability, but my skills still made me a potential, albeit unwilling asset. "We can't go to the authorities, Anna," Harry said, his face grim. "Not yet. We don't have enough concrete, actionable intelligence that they'd believe, especially coming from us. And if we tip our hand too soon, Corvus will accelerate the timeline or shift operations. We'd lose any chance of stopping it." He was right. We were on our own, two ghosts from a forgotten Cold War, standing against a modern, technologically superior foe. Our only hope was to get inside the Blackwood Ridge facility, to gather irrefutable proof of Nightfall Protocol, and if possible, to disable it from within. But the schematics showed a fortress, layers of physical security, biometric scanners, armed guards, and, undoubtedly, a formidable digital defense system managed by Aegis Dynamics' impenetrable code. A frontal assault was suicide. We needed a way in, a Trojan horse. That's when I remembered the other item from Abernathy's hidden Pelican case, the secondary burner phone and the coded ledger. The ledger wasn't just a record of communications. It contained authentication sequences, private passphrases, and what looked like emergency override codes for certain local Magpie systems. Abernathy's personal insurance policy, perhaps. And the burner phone, it wasn't for contacting Silas. The few logged calls were to a heavily encrypted number, a number I suspected led much higher up the Magpie food chain, possibly to Corvus's inner circle, or even Corvus himself. "Harry," I said, an idea, reckless and desperate, forming in my mind. "What if we don't try to break into the Ridge? What if we get invited?" He looked at me, skeptical. "Invited? Anna, they know you're not cooperating. Silas has made that clear." "Silas thinks I'm just being difficult," I countered. "He doesn't know the extent of what we've uncovered. Corvus, on the other hand, might be more pragmatic. If Corvus believes I have something he needs, something critical for Nightfall, he might be willing to overlook my recent reluctance. My plan was to use Abernathy's private burner phone to contact Corvus's network directly, posing as Abernathy, or as someone who had compromised Abernathy. I would claim to have vital, time-sensitive information regarding a critical vulnerability in the Nightfall Protocol's deployment at Blackwood Ridge. A vulnerability only I, with my specific past expertise, could identify and fix. I would make myself indispensable, a necessary evil they had to bring inside their fortress. It was an incredibly dangerous gambit. If they saw through the deception, I'd be walking into a death trap. But if they believed me, it was our only chance. Harry was pale. "Anna, this is beyond risky. You'd be walking into the lion's den, surrounded with no backup." "It's the only way, Harry," I insisted. "We can't stop Nightfall from the outside. I need to get to their systems, understand the attack vectors, find a way to neutralize it. You can be my eyes and ears on the outside, monitor their communications through the tap we placed on Abernathy's line, be ready to enact a contingency if things go wrong." The unspoken part of that contingency was burning any evidence of our involvement and disappearing, a scenario neither of us wanted to contemplate. Reluctantly, Harry agreed. He knew I was right. We spent the next precious hours crafting the message, using the codes and jargon from Abernathy's ledger to make it sound authentic. We also prepared a small data packet containing fabricated but plausible evidence of a system vulnerability. Something sophisticated enough to pique their interest, but not so complex that they could easily dismiss it or fix it remotely. Corvus hesitated. This was a deeper level of access than he had likely intended to grant. Silas immediately objected. "That's too risky. We can isolate a segment." "Isolating a segment won't replicate the full deployment stress," I countered. Smoothly. "The flaw manifests under full system load. We need to test it in situ, or the patch is meaningless." I looked directly at Corvus. "Unless you're willing to risk Nightfall failing at the critical moment." His jaw tightened. The countdown timer on the wall now showed less than 48 hours. He was caught between his inherent suspicion and the ticking clock. "Grant her access," Corvus commanded, his voice tight. "But Silas, if she deviates by a single keystroke from what she has described, terminate her access. And her." Silas reluctantly complied, entering a series of override codes that granted my terminal temporary, high-level access to the Nightfall core. My heart hammered. This was it. As I typed, ostensibly inputting the patch, my fingers flew, initiating the hidden executable from my USB drive. The malware began to deploy, silently, insidiously, spreading through their network like a digital plague. I had to maintain a facade of calm, explaining my actions, while a silent war was being waged within their servers. Suddenly, alarms blared. Red lights flashed across the control room. The main screen displaying the Nightfall countdown flickered, then began to fill with corrupted data. "What's happening?" Corvus roared, his composure finally cracking. Silas lunged towards my terminal, but it was too late. The logic bombs were detonating, the worms were replicating, the data wipers were erasing critical system files. Nightfall protocol was unraveling before their eyes. "You!" Silas snarled, grabbing my arm, his face contorted with rage. But I was prepared. I drove my elbow sharply into his ribs, then used his momentum to throw him off balance. In the ensuing chaos, as technicians scrambled and Corvus shouted orders, I activated my subdermal transmitter. "Harry, now! Initiate exterior contingency!" My message was brief, desperate. Outside, Harry, monitoring their compromised communications, had been waiting for my signal. He had used the information from Abernathy's ledger and my earlier reconnaissance to identify a critical, unshielded junction box for the Blackwood Ridge facility's external power supply. Using a precisely timed electromagnetic pulse device, another relic from his old agency days, he triggered a localized blackout, plunging the entire facility into momentary darkness and chaos as their backup generators struggled to kick in. That brief window of darkness was all I needed. I wasn't trying to escape the facility. That was impossible. My goal was to ensure Nightfall was irrevocably crippled and to leave a clear message. As the emergency lights flickered on, I reached the main server racks. Ignoring Silas, who was recovering, and the approaching guards, I physically disabled several key server arrays, ensuring the damage was not just digital, but also physical. This wasn't just sabotage. It was a scorched earth policy against their catastrophic plans. Guards swarmed me then, and I was quickly subdued. But as they dragged me away, bruised but defiant, I saw the look on Corvus's face. It was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury and disbelief. His grand plan, his Nightfall protocol, was in ruins. The countdown on the main screen was frozen, displaying only error messages. The Magpie Initiative's most ambitious operation had been brought down by one retired librarian and a history professor. The aftermath was complicated. I was interrogated, relentlessly, but I revealed nothing more. They knew I had sabotaged them, but the how and with whom remained largely a mystery to them, thanks to Harry's clean exit and my silence. Eventually, with Nightfall, crippled beyond immediate repair and their local operations in disarray, holding me became more of a liability than an asset. In a way I still don't fully understand, through channels I can only guess at, perhaps some of Harry's old, influential contacts pulled strings from the shadows. I was released, dumped unceremoniously on a remote roadside, miles from Havenwood, with a stern warning never to interfere in their affairs again. I returned to Havenwood a changed woman. The library felt different. The town felt different. I knew its secrets now, and it knew some of mine. Harry and I never spoke directly of what happened at Blackwood Ridge. There was no need. But a new, deeper understanding passed between us. The Magpie Initiative, or what was left of Corvus's faction, vanished from Havenwood as silently as they had arrived, their local network dismantled, their ambitions thwarted. Abernathy's bookstore closed down. Silas was never seen again. My life didn't return to the quiet simplicity it once had. How could it? The ghosts of my past were no longer just memories. They were active participants in my present. But I was no longer just Anna, the librarian, cowering from shadows. I was Hayes, a woman who had faced down a global threat and, against all odds, won. I had protected my town, my adopted home, and perhaps, in doing so, I had finally made peace with the more dangerous parts of myself. The world is full of quiet corners and unassuming people. But sometimes, in those quiet corners, you find a strength you never knew existed, a resilience that can change the course of events. My story is a testament to that. And perhaps it's a reminder that even in the most ordinary lives, extraordinary courage can bloom. What did you think of Anna's incredible journey? Was her final act of defiance what you expected? Share your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think about this tale of unexpected heroism. And if stories of courage against the odds inspire you, make sure to follow our channel for more. Life in Havenwood settled back into its familiar rhythms, or at least it appeared to on the surface. The Founders' Day Fair posters eventually came down, the autumn leaves turned, and the first snows of winter began to dust the quiet streets. For most, the subtle undercurrent of fear and the strange, brief disruptions were forgotten, dismissed, as oddities in an otherwise uneventful year. But for me, and for Harry, the quiet was different now. It was a quiet, hard one, a silence that held the echo of a storm barely weathered. The library was still my sanctuary, but it was no longer a place of hiding. It was a watchtower, a place of calm observation. My interactions with Harry took on a new depth. We still met for our chess games in the library's community room, still discussed books and local history. But beneath the surface of our ordinary conversations, there was an unspoken understanding, a shared knowledge of the abyss we had peered into and, somehow, stepped back from. Sometimes, over the chessboard, our eyes would meet, and in that silent exchange, whole volumes were spoken. He never asked for details about my release, and I never asked how he managed his exterior contingency with such precision. Some things we both understood were better left in the shared silence of survival. He became more than just a friend. He became an anchor, a fellow sentinel in our quiet corner of the world, the persona of Anna the librarian and the ghost of Hayes the operative no longer felt like two separate warring entities within me. They had merged, integrated. I was still Anna, the woman who found solace in the scent of old books and the gentle hum of the library. I still offered reading, recommendations with a quiet smile, and helped children find their next adventure in the pages of a story. But beneath that, Hayes remained, watchful, analytical, forever changed by the reawakening of old skills and the confrontation with a past I thought long buried. It wasn't a burdensome presence, but rather a source of quiet strength, a reminder that I was capable of far more than I or anyone else in Havenwood had ever suspected. The town itself seemed subtly altered, or perhaps it was merely my perception. I saw Havenwood now not just as a quaint refuge, but as a place of hidden complexities, a microcosm of the wider world where ordinary lives could intersect with extraordinary, dangerous secrets. Mr. Abernathy's bookstore remained closed, a silent testament to the events that had transpired. Occasionally, I would see townsfolk glance at it, a flicker of curiosity in their eyes, before moving on, the mystery unsolved for them. I knew, and Harry knew, but that knowledge was a burden we carried quietly. I never heard directly from the Magpie Initiative or Corvus again. Through carefully monitored indirect channels, Harry learned that Corvus's faction had suffered a significant blow, their credibility and operational capacity severely damaged by the Nightfall debacle. There were whispers of internal power struggles, of retribution. Whether Corvus himself survived remained unknown. They were like a wounded predator, slinking back into the shadows to lick their wounds. I knew they wouldn't forget me, but I also knew they would think twice before targeting Havenwood, or me again. The price had been too high for them. There are nights, even now, when the old restlessness returns, when I find myself checking the locks with a more than cursory glance, or when a particular headline in the news sends a faint shiver of unease down my spine. The peace I have is not the naive peace of ignorance I once cultivated, but a vigilant peace, earned through fire and fear. It's a more resilient state, I think. I no longer fear the shadows, because I know I can navigate them. I have faced the worst of my past and not only survived but emerged stronger, more whole. My life as Anna, the librarian of Havenwood, continues. I still stamp due dates, recommend books, and listen to the quiet stories of the town. But now, there's an added layer, a quiet confidence that comes from knowing the depths of one's own resilience. The greatest battles are often fought not on grand stages, but in the quiet recesses of the human heart, and in the unexpected courage found in seemingly ordinary lives. My story, I suppose, is a testament to that. It's a reminder that within each of us lies a capacity for extraordinary action, often hidden until the moment it's most desperately needed. Perhaps you, too, have found an unexpected strength within yourself when faced with adversity. Those quiet victories are the ones that truly shape us, aren't they?